Welcome to the presentation, Speech Sound Disorders and Eligibility in Schools, Integrating New Research with Federal and State Regulations. My name is Marie Ireland. I'm a speech-language pathologist and also a board-certified specialist in child language. Some of you may have heard that there are new articulation norms. You might have heard a rumor that all sounds are now acquired by age 5. If I were you, I would be thinking, my caseload's already too big. What? Before we get too excited, though, let's review the newest research and the requirements for eligibility under IDEA. I want to start by sharing with you the article that started the discussion about speech sound disorders in the United States. In 2018, Sharon McLeod and Kate Crow published something called Children's Consonant Acquisition in 27 Languages across Linguistic Review. It looked at existing norms from 27 different languages, 64 studies total, and they did say that most sounds were acquired by age 6. That created quite a stir here in the United States, and the Informed SLP soon put out a blog post called That One Time a Journal Article on Speech Sounds Broke the SLP Internet. In that article, the Informed SLP authors highlighted the difficulties that we Americans were having understanding the difference between the research and decision making in the United States school systems. This resulted in some additional research and collaboration to address the needs that we were having here in the United States. I'm so excited to share with you that one of the outcomes of that collaboration was a new article by Kate Crow and Sharon McLeod, the original authors. It is in press and will be released soon in the American Journal of Speech-Language Pathology, and it's called Children's English Consonant Acquisition in the United States, a Review. For this study, they reanalyzed the studies of consonant acquisition for researchers who used English, American English, and they also looked at the normative data from our most popular articulation tests here in the United States. They looked at 15 studies and over 18,000 children. One of the things that they found out is that not all tests had separate norms for boys and girls, not all research had separate norms, and that it's true most sounds are acquired by age 6. Now, hearing that, I had some concerns about how school-based SLPs would be able to use this information. And so I asked them to join me and another author in a second research article. It's called Evaluating Children in U.S. Public Schools with Speech Sound Disorders, Considering Federal and State Laws, Guidance, and Research. Myself, Sharon McLeod, Kate Crow, and Kelly Farquharson, who's a professor here in Florida, have had that article accepted as well. It will be out this fall in Topics in Language Disorders, and I'm very excited to share that that journal has agreed to make the article free to anybody and available on the internet. In this article, we examine how to use Sharon and Kate's new norms for American English with IDEA and state requirements. And one of the things we highlight is that tests are not the only indicator that we need to be looking at when we consider making children eligible for services. So let's take a minute to look at the eligibility requirements federally under IDEA. In order to qualify as a child with a disability, the team must determine that the child has an impairment, that that impairment results in an educational impact, and that the child requires specially designed instruction to make progress. It's important that we school SLPs work as part of an interdisciplinary team to gather data from a variety of sources, including developmental, functional, and academic information. And that's part of the law under IDEA. Here are a few other reminders for you. IDEA prohibits the use of any single measure as the sole criterion for determining if a child has a disability. That means no one test or no one piece of data can make that decision for us. We have to be able to document that we have evaluated a speech sound disorder using the current research, those current norms, that we have examined the educational impact, and the need for specially designed instruction. So now let's take a look at making evidence-based eligibility decisions. In order to do that and comply with federal and state regulations, it's important that school SLPs certainly understand the requirements of IDEA, that you know your state regulations, rules, eligibility criteria, that you're familiar with your state and local guidance and resources, and of course, have an understanding of what evidence is in our professional literature. Remember, state regulations differ, and so it's important to use your own state and local guidance to stay in compliance. Let's take a minute to review how to document educational impact. Educational impact can mean a variety of things. It can be an academic impact, such as an inability for a child to spell or read correctly because of their speech sound disorder. The evidence for that is going to be found in children's writing samples and perhaps even teacher running records of oral reading. A child can also have an educational impact that is behavioral or social emotional. That could be a fear of speaking publicly because they're embarrassed. It could be students who are being teased or choose to not participate rather than have their speech sound disorder be heard by others. The way to document behavioral and social emotional educational impact can be through observations in the classroom, interviews with the child, and questionnaires. It's important to understand that other members of the team may be sharing this information with you, classroom teachers, parents, even building administrators. Let's take a moment to review some different resources that can help document educational impact. The first is the ICS, the Intelligibility in Context Scale. It is a free parent report tool that's available in over 60 languages. It helps document children's intelligibility with different communicative partners. It's a wonderful tool to share with teachers as well. Another tool you can use to document educational impact is Percent Consonants Correct. In 2004, Johnson, Weston, and Bain created a more efficient way to calculate percent consonants correct using an imitative task that you score directly on a list of sentences. Here's a picture of Virginia's version of the percent consonant correct imitative sentence scoring form. You'll see the directions are listed on the top, and then there are 36 sentences for the child to imitate. You can score right on the paper and do the calculation at the bottom. If you would like to access this, you can look at the original article from Johnson, Weston, and Bain in the American Journal of Speech Language Pathology, or you can access the form on the Virginia Department of Education website. It's important to take a moment and consider how your school teams document educational impact for speech sound disorders. Do you currently have teacher data to support an academic need that is shown by writing samples or running oral records? Do you have interviews and observation data to show the social emotional impact of a speech sound disorder? If you don't have this documentation, and the only thing you're using is your articulation norms, then you are truly not meeting the requirements of IDEA. When you look back, if you do not have robust information for documenting educational impact, then it's important to take a moment and consider how you can add that to your evaluation repertoire and ask others to contribute data to the meeting. Now let's take a look at documenting the need for specially designed instruction. Specially designed instruction is the third prong of the definition of special education under IDEA. In order to document this, we have to examine if a child requires specially designed instruction to correctly produce a speech sound. This includes stimulability or modifiability. Well, some of you may be saying, the standardized test I use has a stimulability component built in, and that's great. You want to make sure that you complete that and you look at the stimulability data to determine if the child requires specially designed instruction. If you do not have a standardized test with built-in stimulability, then another tool you can use is the Missio probe. The Missio probe looks at stimulability of speech sounds in isolation and in three vowel contexts: E as in me, ah as in father, and oo as in hoop. Looks at the sound in initial, medial, and final position with each of these vowels. If a child can produce the sound correctly with a model 30% of the time, they are considered stimulable and would not need specially designed instruction to make the sound correctly. This is a picture of what a stimulability probe in Virginia looks like. It includes the sounds across the top with the prompt, "Look at me, listen, and say what I say." And then you prompt only for the sounds that are in error. Here again, we're at a time where we need to stop and pause and consider, how do we, as speech-language pathologists and members of an eligibility group, document the need for specially designed instruction? If a child is stimulable and can produce sounds 30% of the time through a variety of vowel contexts, then it's important for us to ask, do they really need specially designed instruction, or can they grow that skill with some home practice or reminders from the general education teacher? The stimulability data from your standardized norm reference tests or from something like the Missio probe can help you document whether a child is stimulable for a speech sound error, or if they are not stimulable, requires the help of a speech-language pathologist, and therefore the answer to that question about specially designed instruction would be yes. This is the third prong of the IDEA definition, and it's really important that you have data to support this. Again, who helps bring this information to the team, and does the team understand that this is a requirement of IDEA? As we think about speech sound disorders and eligibility in U.S. schools, it's critical that we pause for a moment and consider civil rights. Identification of a child as disabled who does not meet the federal definition of special education is a civil rights violation. There may be negative educational consequences as teachers' and parents' expectations diminish, and it is a violation of a child's civil rights to call them handicapped or disabled when they're not. To address the challenge with over-identification, IDEA requires states to submit disproportionate representation data in specific disability categories every time you do a new eligibility in 5 categories, and speech-language impairment is one of those. It's very important to understand that across the country, folks are paying attention to who is being made eligible for special education, and do they really have a disability? What are the clinical implications for you as an SLP? Well, most importantly, you have to consider multiple sources of data. Document all 3 prongs of the definition of special education, and be sure not to prioritize one source of data, like a standardized test score or norm, over others. We have to strictly adhere to the federal and state requirements, and if we do that, it really may end up helping our caseload challenges as well. Now, professionals outside of the school setting also should be aware of these differences, because sometimes a private evaluator may suggest that a child needs therapy. It's important not to pressure public school professionals into inappropriately finding a child disabled and qualifying them for services. When students are not eligible under IDEA, parents can seek clinical services outside of the school setting. That could be through a private practice, an outpatient clinic, a university clinic, or someone in the community. Speech and language services may also be offered in general education for children with speech sound disorders. That can be through the multi-tiered systems of support or RTI initiatives that may be present where you live and work. Those services are appropriate for students who are stimulable or who do not demonstrate an educational impact. Another approach to helping students who don't meet the criteria for IDEA is to do a pre-referral intervention. This could include a home practice program, before and after school practice, or time-limited intervention groups. In Virginia, we have groups called Speech Busters and Sound Breakers, and those children come together for 6 to 8 weeks, target a specific sound, and see if they can fix their own problems. It's important to check with your state and local school district for guidance on how general education SLP services can be offered. I want to also draw your attention to ASHA's admission and discharge criteria. They list factors that are appropriate for admission and discharge. Some of them align well with IDEA and some of them do not. Factors that align with IDEA including a child who's unable to communicate functionally or optimally across environments and with communication partners. Also, children whose communication skills negatively affect educational, social, emotional, or vocational performance. There are some factors in ASHA's admission and discharge criteria that are not appropriate to consider in schools. Those include failure to pass a screening assessment for communication, which relies on a single source of data, and we know IDEA forbids us from using a single source of data. The other factor in ASHA's admission and discharge criteria that is not appropriate to use in school is an individual, family, or guardian seeks to enhance communication skills. That desire for enhancement is wonderful for parents to strive to make their children's lives as rich and robust as possible, but it is not sufficient to call a child disabled under IDEA. Here on the screen are a variety of additional resources in speech sound disorders. There are 5 articles that talk about a variety of factors, tests, norms, single sound errors, and assessing social impact. There are also 2 podcasts if you want to learn more or broaden your view. As we wrap up, let's just take a moment to remember that to be eligible for speech and language services in U.S. schools under IDEA, a team must determine that a student has an impairment, that impairment results in an educational impact. It could be academic, it could be social emotional, but there does have to be data to document what that impact is. And the third prong, the child requires specially designed instruction to make progress. If a child is stimulable 30% of the time or more, research tells us that they do not need specially designed instruction and they can learn to broaden their use of a speech sound with home practice and reminders from others. I've included a list of references with links to the articles that I've mentioned in this talk. If you have questions about eligibility for speech sound disorders under IDEA in public schools in the United States, please contact your state education agency for additional information.